Alla helgons dag is the Swedish All Saints' Day, or the Day of Martyrdom. Like most other celebrations of Allsaints'day, it was held on the 1st of November originally, as it was taken from the Catholic tradition, where the practice is the celebration of this day on the 1st of November. However, in the Swedish Protestant tradition, it is the first Saturday during or after the 31st of October. The same is also the case in Finland and Estonia, where the All Saints public holiday was moved from a fixed date of the 1st of November to a public holiday on the Saturday during the period between the 21st of October and the 6th of November. Thus, sometimes this holiday of the Swedish All Saints' Day might occur at the same time as the Irish and the Anglo-Saxon traditions of Halloween, that is celebrated on the 31st of October as the prelude to the All Saints' Day. The Swedish All Saints' Day goes back to old traditions in the Catholic Church that the Swedish Protestant Church inherited from the 4th century AD, as there existed in certain parts and at sporadic intervals a feast day to commemorate all Christian martyr saints that had died trying to defend Christendom against the persecutions by the Romans. Despite the fact that saints actually do kind of exist still in the Protestant Swedish Church, despite Luther's views on sainthood being against it, the holiday is actually not about saints, but rather assumes a rule of general commemoration of the dead and commemorates all Christian dead and not just martyrs or saints. Thus it is also a day to remember dead relatives. And for the majority of the day you're supposed to remember these departed people in respectful, taciturn silence, as you're supposed to keep away from other people, except for your closest relatives. And as you might imagine, this ideal about a respectful and silent mourning and self-imposed reclusiveness does not match well with Swedish people that have adopted the American tradition of Halloween when it occurs at the same time, with the bombastic clothing and the masks and the trick-or-treat ideas. And in conservative Swedish circles, this is quite frowned upon. Speaking about conservatives though, and Swedish Lutheran Protestant traditions, traditionally, only certain types of food were allowed or eaten during this day, and in certain cases even fasts were upheld during this day. Though it should be said that most Swedish persons no longer practice this. Instead, usually people actually feast during this time, despite the fact that you are not supposed to consume copious amounts of food during this holiday, and rather limit yourself to just certain types of food, or none at all. Another practice that was common in the past during the 18th century, but is rarely done nowadays, except in very few cases, is that people used to flog themselves in remembrance of past martyrs within Christianity. This was called späkning, where you flogged yourself and did self-flagellation, or other types of self-harm, in order to remember the suffering of Christian martyrs. Actually, this is taken from old German and Dutch Christian traditions and was imported into Swedish culture. And even if people might think that this is a purely Catholic idea of sainthood remembrance by flogging yourself, Martin Luther, the originator of the Protestant Reformation, actually regularly practiced self-flagellation as a means of mortification of the flesh. And in the 95 Theses, specifically in Thesis 3, Martin Luther stated that inner repentance is worthless unless it produces various outward types of mortification of the flesh. So this is where this rather extreme practice of self-flagellation comes from. However, I would like to restate that this is very rarely done during the Swedish All Saints' Day, and mostly done within frikyrkor. Frikyrkor are free churches, that is to say, Protestant Christian groups that are not within the standard Swedish National Protestant Church. Though some of them do descend from the Swedish National Protestant Church due to schisms happening within the Swedish National Protestant Church. Others are entirely separate Protestant groups. The most mainstream thing about spackning or self-flagellation I could find with regards to the Swedish All Saints' Day is that it was supposedly done by David Petander in the beginning of the 20th century. That he might have practiced it especially during holy days, such as the Swedish All Saints' Day. However, he can't really be considered really mainstream either, despite being a very important theologian and priest within the Swedish Protestant Church, as he was into a lot of extreme, esoteric and ascetic Christian practices. What I wanted to say is that spackning or self-flagellation is not a common practice during the Swedish All Saints' Day in modern times. Regarding more common practices that are held during the Swedish All Saints' Day is what happens during late evening or night, and that is communal mass in church with certain rituals. For example, the priest during All Saints' Day mass will name all of those that have died from the congregation within the last year. And bells will be tolled, hymns will be sung, music will be played, and then, after these ceremonies, each individual believer is supposed to make an individual approach to a remembrance candle, which is usually placed in the middle of the church, and lit a candle as you call out each person's name of those that are close to you and have been lost, and you make individual prayer around this candle for the deceased that you feel need the honor and God's grace. If you are a truly devout traditional believer, then you will also wear special clothing that is worn during many days of Christian celebration. These are usually black or white. But there is a type of special clothing used among certain groups of Protestants in Sweden that are very similar to the clothing used during celebration of the holiday of St. Lucy's Day, as there is some overlap in traditions. This means clothing such as robes in white and sometimes even hoods in order to reduce one's own distinctiveness and to increase one's own humbleness in remembrance of the dead and one's own fleeting nature before the judgment of God. Sometimes the carrying of burning torches and candles during both the day and the night or evening of All Saints' Day is also done. And before you ask, my American viewers, no, this is not KKK dresses. Though the origins of this clothing style, by both the KKK and the believers that practice the Swedish version of All Saints' Day, are actually going back to older Christian traditions regarding white clothing, hoods and various rituals. See for example the Catholic caperuit dress used in Southern Europe during certain celebrations. However, it should be emphasized again that the Swedish All Saints' Day is a time of mourning and sad remembrance rather than the happy occasion of Halloween. But it's also a very sacred day, and thus very different from Halloween in America, that has been largely secularized in its celebration. And thus, it's actually considered a day where demons, spirits and trolls are at their weakest in Swedish folklore. And thus, actually, people running around in various monster masks and the like is actually seen kind of as being strange from a Swedish perspective. Because remember, for believing Swedish Protestants, this is a day to remember martyrdom and the faithful dead who are now in God's grace, in whom you can trust. Faith conquering evil. Belief in God's mercy being above the evils of the world. Thus, it is also considered a good day where evil will not touch you. So even if it's a day of sadness, it's also a day of peace and quiet comfort, and the greatness of God for the Protestant believers in Sweden. That was a short video about the Swedish All Saints Day. I hope you liked it. If you have any questions or other comments, please do state them. Please do subscribe, as it would help the channel spread awareness about the humanities. اشترك بالقناة من فضلكم.